If you have seen Cecil B. DeMille's classic epic biblical film, The Ten Commandments, then you may remember that there's a scene taken directly from this morning's Torah portion, not the crossing of the Red Sea, but the scene in which the Israelites carry the bones of Joseph out of Egypt at the moment of the Exodus. And in that scene, in the movie, the men carrying the bones of Joseph are at the very front of the procession of thousands of Israelites leading the way for our people. And in the movie, as they pass by, a small boy pulls on his grandfather's sleeve and he says, "Grandfather, Aaron and the elders carry a shrouded body." And his grandfather very stoically replies, "Ah, yes, those are the bones of Joseph to be laid to rest in his own land." And what I love so much about that scene, which I vividly remember from when I was growing up, and I used to watch the Ten Commandments on cable every year in the days leading up to Passover, and my parents are here, they can confirm that, is that Cecil B. DeMille in that scene really emphasizes the fact that the Exodus wasn't simply an Exodus, it was also a funeral procession for Joseph. The final scene in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Torah, recounts the death of Joseph. Joseph, at 110 years old, is on his deathbed, surrounded by his brothers, and he tells them that the Israelites are going to be in Egypt for many generations, but eventually God will remember them and redeem them. And then Joseph does something fascinating. He makes his brothers swear that when the moment of liberation arrives, his bones will be carried out of Egypt with the Israelites to be buried in the land of Israel. Vayashba Yosef et bnei Israel, and Joseph made his brothers swear that they would do this. As we read in this morning's Torah portion, when Moses goes to retrieve the bones of Joseph at the moment of the Exodus, he hearkens back to that promise that Joseph made his brothers swear hundreds of years earlier. Vayikach Moshe et atzmot Yosef imo, ki hashbea hishbia at bnei Israel. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made his brothers swear an oath that they would carry his remains up from Egypt to the land of Israel. Everybody else was busy taking gold and all kinds of other treasures from Egypt at the moment of the Exodus, but Moses preoccupied himself with finding the bones of Joseph so that he could fulfill a promise that was made hundreds of years before he was born. And the rabbis of the Talmud teach that our ancestors, as they wandered through the wilderness, had two boxes at the front of their procession. One was the Aron HaBrit, one was the Ark of the Covenant that contained the two tablets which Moses brought down from Sinai, and the other was the coffin which contained the bones of Joseph. And when people would see the Israelites marching through the wilderness with two boxes side by side, they would ask, "What's in those boxes?" And the Israelites would respond by saying, "The person whose remains lie in this box fulfilled the commandments that are enshrined in that box." Or, to put it slightly differently, the person whose remains lie in this box gave his life so that we are now able to fulfill the commandments that are enshrined in that box. Today is International Holocaust Memorial Day, the day on which the world commemorates the liberation of Auschwitz, which took place exactly 79 years ago to the day, January 27th, 1945. And it's so fitting this morning, the day on which we commemorate our liberation at the end of the Holocaust, that we also read the story of Kriyat Yam Suf, the crossing of the Red Sea, the story of our liberation thousands of years ago. In fact, if you ever see a Holocaust Torah on public display, it will always be open to this week's Torah portion, because our liberation in 1945 was really the next iteration of our liberation from Egypt, the next step on our journey me'avdut lecherut, from slavery to freedom. But it's even more fitting that we read not only the crossing of the Red Sea this morning, but we also read that story of the bones of Joseph. When Joseph made his brothers promise that they would take his remains to the land of Israel, he knew that his brothers would die long before the Exodus actually happened. And what he was really making his brothers swear was that their descendants, throughout the generations would not forget him, that their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren would always remember Joseph and his story and the sacrifices that he made for our people. And today, each and every one of us is a participant in that very same promise that was made to Joseph. On International Holocaust Remembrance Day in 2024, today, we have an obligation to not only keep the memory of Joseph alive, but of course, to keep the memory of the 6 million alive. According to the Claims Conference, the survivor population in the United States has now dropped below 50,000, with a projected 76% decline by the year 2030. That's just 6 years away. In a very short amount of time, the survivors will no longer be here. They'll no longer be here to share their stories, to tell us firsthand what it was like to live through the darkest period in Jewish history, and to remind us to never forget. And as we all know far too well, the obligation to never forget is more important now than it has been at any point in the last 79 years since January 27th, 1945. October 7th was the worst massacre of Jews since the Shoah. Israel is being accused of committing genocide at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, and rates of anti-Semitism in this country are as high as they have been since Germany in the 1930s. As Representative Josh Gottheimer reminded us when he spoke to our congregation on Thursday night, 8 American citizens are still being held hostage by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. 8 Americans are being held by a terrorist organization in Gaza, and nobody in this country seems to care. Where's the outrage? Where is the righteous indignation? And the sad reality is that nobody cares about those 8 Americans because they're Jews. Joseph made his brothers swear that they would never forget him, and Moses fulfilled that promise. And today, we too have an obligation to swear that we will never forget, and that we will pass on the stories of the Shoah to our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. As the survivor population continues to dwindle, let us never forget the ways in which they suffered, what they lived through, what they taught us. Vayikach Moshe et atzmot Yosef imo. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. He kept Joseph's memory alive. And so too will we keep their memories alive as we continue along our long march to freedom. Shabbat Shalom.